Amen. What a cool song. Hey, friends, family, people that don't know who I am. My name is Chase. So excited that you are joining us right now on the World Wide Web from wherever you're watching. Thank you for sitting back, relaxing, and enjoying our service today. I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about today and how it's going to look. I'm super pumped, but I want to tell you a story about how we got to today. So this week, I'm preparing a message. We're supposed to close out our series called Christianity from the Couch. But, we're kind of getting sick of the couch because it's getting too nice outside. It's been like 10 weeks stuck inside. So we're like, you need to get outsides, hence the lawn chairs, right? So we were thinking that'd be a cool thing. I'll preach from a lawn chair. And I was going to talk about prayer. In the end of 1 John, which is what we've been talking about, chapter 5, it says that if you pray according to what pleases God, He hears us. And if He hears us, He'll give us what we ask for. So I wanted to talk about the importance of persistence in our prayer life. And I wanted to share this story from Luke chapter 18. And I'm going to read it, and you'll see how we got to today. So here in Luke chapter 18, Jesus was sharing with His disciples a story. And He says this. It says, Luke 18, verse 1. One day, Jesus told His disciples a story to show them they should always pray and never give up. Be persistent. So He shares this story. It says, there was a judge in a certain city, and he said, who neither feared God nor cared about people. A widow of that city came to him repeatedly saying, give me justice in the dispute with my enemy. The judge ignored her for a while, but finally he said to himself, I don't fear God or care about people, but this woman is driving me crazy. I'm going to see that she gets justice because she is wearing me out with her constant requests. Then the Lord said, learn a lesson from this unjust judge. Even he rendered a just decision in the end. So don't you think God will surely give justice to His chosen people who cry out to Him day and night? And so on Wednesday, I'm reading through that story and I'm preparing this message. And on Wednesday, I also did what many of us and many of you were doing. I was reading posts and watching videos of the horrendous death of George Floyd. And all of a sudden, as I read this scripture and it said the woman was crying out, give me justice day and night, I felt a stirring inside of me that said, you got to do something here. And it was one of those moments, like those God nudges in your life. I don't know if you are recognizing those, but I'm trying to work more on recognizing and understanding and responding to the moments where God speaks into my heart and tells me I should say that or do that. And it was one of those moments where I read that, give me justice, where I decided we need to change what we're going to talk about. No longer are we going to talk about prayer, but we need to talk about something a little bit differently. We need to address the situation going on in our world. And so on Facebook, I read a post from a Facebook friend of mine who I had never met until this week. And I read his post, and I was convicted, and I was challenged, and I was really encouraged by what he had to say. And I connected this nudge as I read Scripture and this nudge as I read Facebook and said, all right, God, I need to call this guy. Now, I don't have his number, so I figure out his number, I call this guy, and I leave a message. I'm like, hey, man, you don't know me, and I don't know you, but I read your Facebook post, and I got an idea. Call me back. Thankfully, he called me back, and we started talking. I said, hey, man, we need to have a conversation. I was challenged and encouraged by what you had to say on Facebook. Would you be willing to have a conversation about racism and injustice and followers of Jesus and what we should do in the midst of this? And he said yes, and he had no idea what he was getting into. So today, I want to welcome to the stage my new friend, Hezekiah Trevino. And if you could, put your hands together from wherever you're sitting on your lawn chairs or wherever, come and welcome Hezekiah to the stage for me right now. It's so loud in here. Oh, you got all your stuff in your hand. We made a decision. We're okay with a little bit of handshakes and high fives. Just don't tell the governor or anybody. We don't want to get in trouble. So, all right. Welcome, Hezekiah, my man. Before we get rolling, and I let you do all the talking, because I'm here to learn. Before we get rolling, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, for trusting this weirded, bearded guy, and for just coming and sharing your story with us. And I think one of the reasons, no matter what goes on today, no matter if people like it or not, what we're doing I think is so powerful is we are setting an example of what it looks like to sit down and have a conversation with someone that's different than you and that you don't even know, which I think is kind of the cooler part about this, that when just to hear a story and to hear kind of what you have to say. So thanks, man, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right, but there's enough people out here watching that they know me, but they're like, who's Hezekiah? You know a few people, there's some connection you have to our church, but kind of share a little bit about who you are and even your connection with like YFC and stuff. Tell us a little bit about Hezekiah.
So I am 25 years old. I'm a Latino, a full Latino. Both my parents are Mexican. Not from Mexico. My parents aren't from Mexico. They're from here too. But full-blooded, and I don't know Spanish. My parents never taught me Spanish, so it's their fault. I always blame them. I'm going on this August will be 2 years of marriage with my wife. I call her my caramel queen.
Queen.
She is. She's mixed white and black. I also know these crazy people here that you might know, Trent and I'm sorry, Pastor Trent. Pastor,
Trent.
so weird to say. Pastor Trent and Kelsey and Charlie Monroe and Q and all them. Familiar with you guys, and I also work apart from YFC and Campus Life, where I work in the schools, Eastern, Everett, and Sexton. I also work in the school at Eastern, have my office there, and at Holt Junior High School, where I kind of deal with conflicts, not kind of deal with conflicts, but I do deal with conflicts between students, mostly the students that get in trouble a lot, and mostly all minority students. So that's also one of my jobs. So I have a couple different jobs. I'm also a musician. Me and my wife lead a band at Riverview Church in Rio Town, and music's kind of one of my main things that I do. So yeah, that's just a little about me.
A little bit about you. Well, thank you so much for that. Yeah, Knows YFC connected there. You are the campus life director for all the Lansing high schools, right?
Yep. Eastern, Everett, and Sexton. Yep.
Love it. All right, awesome. So that's a little bit about you. All right, but let's kind of dive into a little bit about what we wanted to talk about. And one of the things we started talking, I just said, and your post mentioned this too, which is why I thought it was really good, is we're seeing, like, we see such big scale racism, on Facebook, thanks to cell phones and social media and all that stuff. Like, we see police brutality. We see, like, this big, giant scale of things. But one of the things you mentioned in your Facebook post, like, can you talk a little bit about how this goes on, like, all around us on what I'll call, like, smaller levels that we don't even, sometimes we're not even aware of, that's probably leading and feeding this problem. Can you kind of share a little bit about some of those smaller scale things?
Okay. So I think to understand most of the smaller issues that are around us every day, you kind of have to understand some of the history that's behind what led us here. I'm not going to give a whole history lesson on stuff, but one thing I can bring up is something called redlining. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with redlining, but redlining, just a brief description, back in the 1930s after the Great Depression, the government had created the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration. They worked with different banks and stuff to basically give loans to the middle class, or creating the middle class, giving loans to people who normally couldn't afford a loan or a home or a mortgage, and building what is now like most of the suburbs across America. And to kind of change the direction of the economy, right? Because 1/5 of Americans were unemployed. Mostly everybody was struggling financially. There was a lot of poverty. And the great thing is that it worked. Like the government mandated program, it worked. People were getting loans, people were buying houses, but what history books fail to mention is that out of the $120 billion that were given in loans to build houses, only 2% was given to minorities. 98% was given to white families. I know a lot of people are probably thinking like, oh, well, it's just homes. Well, that $120 billion that was given back then is now equate to over $5 trillion worth of, money they could have used to invest, if they sold their homes, things like that, really creating generational wealth for these people that, back then. They call it redlining because when the government put out these maps, right, in the major cities, and they would color in red all the areas where the minorities lived. It had really nothing to do with anything else but where the minorities lived. And they would color in red these areas, and what would happen is they would give these maps to the bank and say, hey, you can't give loans to these people in the red area, but the green areas, which is all the white people, you could give loans to them. And so that's kind of and this is the government that had made these maps. So a lot of injustice there, and really something like that leading back to or creating even more issues, even with education, because as these redlined areas even today are still majority minorities, even from back in 1930 all the way to today, most of these redlined areas, maps that they had created are still filled with mostly minorities and are now considered, or really are, some of the ghettos and the bad areas of town still. Of course, because schools are funded from local property taxes, these schools that are in these redlined areas, which is mostly minority areas, they don't get as much funding as some of the people in white suburbia, where obviously they're going to have more money there. So obviously you're left with schools that are severely underfunded. That's why even like Detroit is a good example of that. You could see a school that's like pretty much falling apart, and down the road in suburbia, you'll see a school with marble flooring just across town. So stuff like that, it affects the education system. And I think like a lot of people don't see how a lot of the things that we can't control, a lot of people bring up, black on black crime, which, they can kind of have an argument, but not really, because when the government had created these redlined areas, obviously these ghettos, when people are struggling, when they're struggling to trying to survive, they're going to commit crimes, right? And it's something that minorities didn't put on themselves. It's something that they weren't, this isn't something that we wanted.
And that's a good picture of just one thing that shows like where we're at today. Like there's some bigger things that have happened that kind of led us to some of these smaller, what I'll call smaller scale stuff, so like educational things. Yep. I think you worded it in your post. I thought this was interesting. Like you can have a school that might have holes in the floors on one area, and yep. Don't drive too far, and they're giving out iPads to their students to take home. Which again, not that it's bad that these kids are getting good educational tools, but it's just like there's some difference in that. This is all set up from some history that has taken place. So.
Yeah, and even still, like this, like the government mandated this in like the 1930s. It wasn't illegal until about 1970 that it was illegal to, discriminate against race for buying homes and stuff like that. So a lot of this stuff, even still today, people in those redlined areas, they have higher interest rates. They pay higher insurance premiums. Even today, and so there's a lot of stuff that relate back to that red line.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things we kind of talked about, we chatted once today, or once this week, in our conversation, and one of the things we were talking about is just one thing I think would be helpful for just to be open and blunt. White people is I'm white. I don't have any experience in my past where I can look and say because of the color of my skin, I've been treated unfairly, and I don't have to be ashamed of that. I just don't have that experience. I don't have that past. So I thought, and you were okay with this, if you wanted to share and could share maybe a story or two, just to help us see like this stuff that we think is years and years and years ago, that doesn't happen nowadays. Like there are still real stories of people being treated and mistreated because of their skin color. So can you share any story? Help us understand a little bit more.
Yeah. So one story I could bring up. I know you see stuff on the news and you think, oh, well, that only happens there, but it happens here too. And sometimes we just don't see it. There's a time when right before my brother was born, my younger brother, my parents were leaving church. My dad's a pastor, so we're leaving church. All of a sudden, he's surrounded by, a squad of police cars, tell him to get out the car. He gets out the car, they, handcuff him, put him to the ground, but before they handcuffed him, he was trying to grab his wallet, showed his identification and stuff like that, and, they guns drawn right away, he tells me, he's like, I heard the click of the guns when I went to grab for, my wallet, all to find out that it was because another Latino male was, I guess, committed some crime, some serious crime in the neighborhood, and they had a picture of the male that didn't even look like my dad, but because he was a Latino male, he almost died that day, something like that. And personal stories, I remember I was young, probably 6th or 7th grade. Me and my cousin, who's also Latino, we walked to the local Quality Dairy and, wanted to get some snacks, right? Just innocent. And I remember specifically, I was like looking in the gum aisle and I was like seeing like what best deal, because they ain't got a lot of money, right? So I'm like, man, this got like 32 pieces. This one's got like 16 pieces, right? And so I was like reading it, putting it down, putting it down. And I remember there was a white male in the back, I guess in the freezer, where they stock up the milks and stuff. And he was just peeking, like watching us. And he came out of nowhere and was just like, hey, I seen you guys stealing. And we're like, I was confused. I was like, okay, what's going on? Like, I didn't steal nothing. Me and my cousin, I remember my cousin was angry, and we was like, and we showed him our pockets. We're like, we don't have nothing in our pockets. Like, we're not stealing anything. We're just here to get some snacks, like we're kids. And he was just like, leave my store right now before I call the cops. And I remember I had to hold my cousin back and pull him back, and I remember going home and crying and thinking like, hurting, like, why am I getting kicked out because of how I look? Yeah. So, wow, I didn't expect to cry.
That's all right, man.
I remember even, I was 18, 19. I had just bought this new Dodge Charger. I worked hard, worked 60-plus hours a week. I remember seeing this cop parked across the street while I was pumping gas, and I knew he was going to pull me over as soon as I pulled out because I was on the west side of Lansing. West side of Lansing is kind of bad for us minorities. I remember seeing him. He was looking at me. I finished pumping my gas, pulled out slowly, really was trying to be careful. All of a sudden, I seen boop, 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 and surely enough, I got pulled over. I remember the first thing he asked me is, do you own this car? And I was just like confused, like, what? Like, what do you mean? I was like, yeah. And I gave him my information, and he never told me why he pulled me over. But the last thing he said was like, oh, I seen you pulling out of the gas station pretty quickly, so that's why I pulled you over. And I was confused, but later on realizing I was pulled over because I was a young Latino male who owned a nice car, and he thought I stole it. So stories like that, but even, what builds up hurt and pain is even microaggressions. So microaggressions would be, like even just this Friday, like right after we had our talk, I remember I went to Myers. Don't go to the store often with all the stuff going on. But me and my wife went to Myers to get some stuff. Was walking out. There's a white guy in a van. As soon as I approach the van to pass him to get to my truck, he locks the doors. And then as soon as I clear the van, he unlocks the doors, right? And I could hear it, obviously. It's not the first time that happens. That happens all the time. And sometimes it's just something that you become desensitized to, which is not healthy. So little things like that, or like when I'm walking in the store and a lady's walking out and she clenches her bag because she sees me coming, or they go the other way in the aisle, stuff like that. Little things that you might not think about. Those are microaggressions that really affect us.
Yeah.
So
yeah, on that smaller scale that, like you said, is happening all around. I mean, when you're 19, that's 6 years ago, and just last Friday, like it's stuff that's still happening today. And I think sometimes we feel so far removed from it. We think, well, slavery is so long ago. We're not dealing with that anymore. But we are. And all these little stories are legit. And they're happening all the time, all around us. And I think it's important for us to just hear that. And I appreciate you just being willing to be honest and vulnerable and share that and let us even feel your emotions, man. I think that's important because, like I said, I don't know that experience, and until I hear it from you and know that it's really happening and know it's real, like it's hard for me to relate, and it's hard for me to empathize with you, but hearing the story is super powerful, and I know that's hopefully helpful for you guys too. So when something like this happens, that happened this week, the death of George Floyd, or even a few months ago with Ahmaud, and as he was running down the street, his life was taken and he was murdered. Like what kind of goes through your head? How does this stuff like this impact you?
I think personally, it's the first thing that goes through my head is this is our reality. This is something that happens every day. It might not be displayed on the news all the time, but it's something that we experience every day. And you could sometimes get a sense of hopelessness, feeling like, if are we going to just forget about this and move on with our lives the way it is again, just like the last 20 times, are we going to, forget about the Trayvon Martins, Tamir Rice's, George Floyd's, and, and wait for the next statistic to finally do something. But then I also have a sense of hope, I have a sense that, eventually people are going to start seeing it. I think like this last situation, things have kind of gotten pretty crazy. But I think it's kind of shifted a lot of people's vision and brought clarity to a lot of people who normally wouldn't, do anything. Yeah. So I do feel a sense of hope, like now things are going to start going in the right direction, hopefully. Yeah. And so that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. So the question I had talked to you about was, like, you're a follower of Jesus, I'm a follower of Jesus. Like, help us understand as followers of Christ, and for those that are listening that don't follow Jesus, like, help us understand why this conversation is important for us to have, and why this matters to the church and to people that claim to be followers of Christ. Why is this so important for us to not just keep scrolling on Facebook, but to speak into this? And why are we having this conversation on Sunday? What's this about?
I think it's important because in Acts 4, I believe, it said, all the believers were together. They didn't keep anything for themselves, but they were giving, and nobody went on, what was the word?
Nobody went without.
Nobody went without. And I think that was the perfect example of what Christship is, or like following Jesus is. And how I work in the school system, I see it every day. I see the lack of people coming in from the outside and volunteering or tutoring, the lack of tutors, and how these kids are struggling educationally, and the lack of resources that they have. I see it personally every day. And then also, I remember one time I was, like I told you, I used to clean carpets, and I used to clean a lot of carpets in like suburb areas and stuff. I remember one time this guy stopped me and he asked me, he was just like, "Hey, what high school do you go to?" Just making small talk, and I was like, "Oh, Eastern High School." And I was like, "That's where I graduated." And he's like, "Oh, you survived there?" And I was thinking like, survived? Like, I guess, like it wasn't that bad, to me. And he was like, "Oh, I heard they got like drugs and guns and everything in there, and like it's real crazy over there." And I was just like, like there's bad people in there. I was like, there's bad things that happen, but at the end of the day, there's still people. And I think one of the big things I want people to understand is, we're still people. Yeah. We just have different situations that might have brought us to do certain bad things, but I don't think that there should be any fear when it comes to going to that side of town or going into that school. I have a feeling that some people are just scared to, go into the schools and deal with these kids, who are different from them, because of fear of what they've seen or what has been planted in their heads. And I want you to know that, I don't think that's a heart of Christ. I think Jesus would have went into the schools and he would have went into those neighborhoods and done what he can for them.
Yeah. I told you I'd quote Q. Q's, if you don't know Q goes to our church. He's one of our volunteers here. He also volunteers for Campus Life, and we talked this week, and we were just checking in, seeing how he's doing, and we're chatting, and Q said something, man, that I thought was really powerful. And Q is a young black guy. He's 25-ish, I don't know. He's 20-ish. Yeah. Q, I don't know how old you are. Sorry, buddy. But he said this. He said, man, I feel like Christians, like, what we need to do is, like, the world needs God's love. Like, I just wish we would love people with God's love. And as you say that, and you talk about fear, 1 John, we were just in 1 John, and in 1 John is where it says, perfect love casts out fear. And there's there's this powerful piece to that of like, we had a whole service like 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago about loving people, no matter what they look like, no matter how you feel about them, no matter if they think differently than you, or act differently, or look differently. You like, love is that huge piece. And so I told you, Q, I'd quote you, we need God's love, and that powerful love doesn't allow us to be fearful. And, we could quote so many verses that talk about, there's no difference between, female, male, Gentile, Jew. Like, that was race. Like, that's what they're talking about there. And just that we are one in Christ, and it's our love for the world that people will know that we're followers of Christ. So I think that love piece is really powerful. And so let's kind of turn, we'll kind of slowly wrap things up a little bit here. And talk about kind of things we can do, things we should do, especially kind of bouncing off as followers. And I want to bounce back to that verse I started with where the persistent widow was crying out, "Give me justice." And it said later that she cried out day and night. But it also said that just like this unjust judge who doesn't care about people gave her what she wanted because he thought she was crazy, because she kept asking and asking, he says, won't God do the same for his chosen people who cry out to him day and night? And so I would just say, like, it starts with us. It starts with us recognizing that as followers of Christ, we have a powerful weapon in this, and that's prayer. And so we need to be daily crying out, give us justice. Like, that's the first step I think we can take, recognizing that what we're going through is bigger than just us. So we need God's help in this, but also not forget that it also, as the famous theologian once said, Michael Jackson, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. And so we can steal that quote and apply it here today and recognize it starts with us praying to God first. But I would propose something that I'm trying to do, because even as when we talk about microaggressions, we talk about things that we don't even think of, it starts with us. It starts with us looking in the mirror and realizing that we can help make a change. And I would encourage us to pray this dangerous prayer. The reason I call it dangerous is because if you do it and you're open and your heart's open to this, God will show you some things. And so let me share this verse, Psalm 139. It says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life." So I guess the question I would have to everyone listening right now, I don't care what color skin you have, I don't care where you're from, where your background, whether you believe in Jesus or not, would you be willing to open up your heart and say, "Search me, God"? To spend some time asking God to point out anything in your life that offends him, anything in your heart that is wrong or racist or unjust, to say, like, I'm starting with me. I'm going to look inside. I'm going to say, God, is there a way that I think when someone walks by me? Is there a way that I act? Is there something that goes on in my heart? Do I lock the doors? Is what inside of me can you illuminate the thoughts or the things that I do? Can you search me? And I really believe if we go to God and ask him that, like, he's going to do that. Like, he's going to be faithful and illuminate some areas that we all can work on. And so I would say it starts with us going to God in prayer to help us change who we are and how we see things. But give us a few other things. One of the things I loved about your post was you kind of helped put some simple, practical ways that we can be a part of fighting against this. So kind of share some thoughts you have on that.
Definitely one of the first things is having that conversation, like now. I don't think that it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing.
Invite some guy you don't know to your church to sit on stage and record it in front of everybody. Yeah, I like that. Good.
Doesn't have to be exactly like that, but just having a conversation with somebody that looks different than you, being able to, you may not totally understand them, or where they're coming from, but just starting that conversation is huge. And it might be awkward at first, it might be uncomfortable. But that's fine. If it's uncomfortable, that means you're growing.
That's right.
And so I think that's one of the first, the first of the many things that you should do. The second thing is definitely educate yourself. There's a lot of good resources out there. White Fragility is a good book, and that's by, what's his name? Robin DiAngelo. And then there's a book called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. That's a good book that talks about redlining and stuff like that. But just learning your history, and educating yourself about everything that's happened, and that's another good thing. Another thing is definitely just being open-minded to it. I think, like I said, it's gonna be uncomfortable. It's gonna be, you may not totally understand where we're coming from, but, just to be open-minded and, know that we're going to have different views on things because we grew up differently. Being open-minded is huge. Like a lot of people talk about, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I'll just tag in on
yeah.
the education piece. 'Cause I was telling you this, like, so one, a book I'm starting to read right now that I was recommended was called The Color of Compromise. Talks about the church and how the church, even in the past, has kind of been a part of this. So I just started it, but I've heard it recommended from other pastors. I think it's really good. But I was telling you, educating your kids. So I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I just think you can start at that age. So we've been just doing it through movies. Thank you, Disney Plus and Netflix, because we've watched Remember the Titans? We watched Glory Road, and we just try to find some of these movies that they can watch, that they can get into, but that show, like, real life, this stuff happening, and the questions that they, come up with, and we're able to just be like, use that simple, Remember the Titans is like the best movie ever anyway, so we can use that movie to kind of have these conversations at 7 and 9 on a level they can understand, and so I'm just like, you're not too young to start, and you can start with your family, because if we can educate the next generation now, like, they're going to be in a much better position than we're at our age. So yeah, education is super good, but I just want to tag in a little Netflix love.
No, that's good. And then also, my biggest thing is doing, just do. If you're, like I said in my post, that you've found me from and invited me here about, doing, if you're, educated, going and tutoring the schools. I see the lack of tutors in the schools. They literally hardly have any tutors in the schools, in the Lansing School District. So they need tutors. Don't think that, they already have a bunch. There's really a lack. So if you're educated, start tutoring. Help these kids that are not getting the right kind of education. If you're a tradesman, start teaching some, free classes on your trade skills, that normally these kids wouldn't be able to afford, instead of them being on the street, selling drugs and, stealing, that they could, set up a future and a job for them. If you're a doctor or a lawyer, start mentoring some kids and, bringing them in and start teaching them the pathway, if you're a business owner, lend out your space and do, recreational activities for kids in the inner city, or if you don't have time to do anything, your money's huge. Donate to organizations that are in the community and are in the schools that are doing something. Doing is huge. And then I think lastly is just loving. Like Hugh said, it's just to love. Love us how we are, where we are, and when people say I don't see color, I think that's a lie. That's not a good, I feel like that's a cop-out of, because we see our color.
Yeah.
I'm proud to be a Latino.
Yeah.
I'm proud of my culture. I love my culture. I love tacos. I love carne asada.
Now, wait a second. Now we have something in common. See, we haven't been friends enough to know that that's a big thing. So I didn't tell him to say that, but tacos, man, that's like my jam. So we're getting closer to best friend status right now. Thank you. All right, go. Sorry, you were on a real.
If you
good
see
start.
tacos, you see color. No, but. No, but seriously, we're proud of our culture. We're proud of where we came from. We're proud of everything that we have gone through, and to not see that is kind of disrespectful to us, because we see color, and you should be proud of your color. You should be proud of who you are, because God created us all differently. Yes, we're all one, but He also created us unique. And so that's huge. Just love us how we are and where we are.
Yeah, I think that's good. I love talking about how we're all made in the image of God, right? And I think it's really powerful when we recognize that every single person bears the image of God. So, and we're all different. We all look different. We all act different. And so all of us bring a unique piece of God's image to the table. So I think it's awesome that you said that it's not about not seeing a color, it's about seeing color and appreciating the history and appreciating the color and recognizing it and learning about it.
Yep.
It's hard to appreciate something if you don't know about it.
Yep.
And so I think it's important that we not only see each other, but we learn from each other, that we have conversations like this, that when taco places open back up, now that I have your number, you can't run from hide from me. We're going to go get some tacos together. I'll take you to my favorite establishment. It's probably not on the level of like real tacos, but I love it's Taco Bell, man. So we'll at least, we can get drive-through and talk later after the service, maybe a little bit more. So, well, I just want to say thank you, man. I truly, truly appreciate your willingness to come sit down and have a conversation with me. I appreciate all that you're doing and just the voice you're having. And I want to give you, final words. There's anything else you'd want to say to us, to this church, to the people listening right now? Is there any final words you might have before we sign off?
Just thank you for being open. If you're still listening, just being open and to hearing and to trying to understand and pushing forward. I know. Sometimes it could be confusing for white people, because it's like, do I say something? Do I not say something? If I say something, it's the wrong thing. But if I don't say something, they hate me, so it's like, I know it could be confusing and I'm sorry for that. But so that's why I kind of gave those action steps, I believe faith without works is dead,
Yes.
So if you're going to say something, do something about it,
Yes.
Use your resources that you have, because a lot of white people have more resources than minorities. And if you could use your connections and your resources to help change the community instead of, just, being scared of it or, avoiding it or ignoring it, we could all come together to make that change.
Yeah.
So.
I love that. Yeah, I love it. And that was the convicting part for me of your post, is it says, use what you can and do something. And I was like, well, we have cameras at the church, and I have a platform, and I know what I can do. I can invite this guy and see if he'll have a chat with me, and I appreciate for doing that. And so thank you for that encouragement. Thank you for challenging us. I hope that everyone listening, I hope that you were encouraged. I hope that you got something from this, and we just want to thank you. You mind if I pray, man? We'll close it out. We'll get the worship team back up here, close us out with a sweet, sweet, powerful song about God's promises, and he's a faithful, awesome God and worthy of our worship. So, yes.
Also, I know today, like even as we're speaking, there's a protest downtown Lansing. So if you could pray for that too.
Yeah, let's do that for sure. Let's pray. Father, we're just grateful for the love that you show every single one of us. We're grateful that your love is unconditional, sacrificial, and it's for all people. Help us to have that same kind of love towards people, especially in this conversation, people that don't look like us or act like us or live where we live. Like, Lord, just help us to love people and to see them as image bearers. And if they're made in your image, then they are important to you. And if they're important to you, they're important to us. Lord, I just want to pray right now for the protests happening in Lansing. Lord, we know that voices need to be heard, and change needs to happen on a large scale level. And so we just pray for the people that are going there, Lord, that they would be able to get their voice heard, that people would hear them, that they would be safe as they protest, that they would be loved by those of us that are seeing what's going on, Lord, and that we would able to step forward into a new future because of people standing up and standing out against this injustice that is happening. So we love you. We thank you for giving us Jesus as the perfect example of what love should look like. So may we model our lives after him and love people, not just how we want to be treated and loved, but how Jesus loved, with a perfect kind of love. So we thank you for this conversation. I pray that you were honored by it. Help us to move forward in a mighty, powerful way to bring more glory to your name. It's in your name we pray.